is the worst that can happen. So, ta-da! Well, welcome to the Shakti Collective. And today we have with us Omar. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Omar Bonilla, and I'm an accessibility specialist at Thomson Reuters. So I work heavily with UX designers and software developers as well. I help basically make our technology work for people with disabilities. So that's what I've chosen to do as my career, and I enjoy it every day.
That is so cool. So, if you had to describe accessibility in just three words, what would they be?
Um, Always do good. I think there's always a chance to do good, not just better, not just best. It's not, not in a competitive sense. It's always do good, do something meaningful for somebody else. Because that's really what accessibility is making sure that we design the tools and products, the technology that we create, make sure that everybody can have access to that, regardless of whatever disability you may live with. So that's something that I try to live by at work and just in my life every day.
That is so beautiful. So, what really made you like, why do you care about accessibility?
Sure. I care about accessibility because it is personal to me. It's personal to me because I have family who live with disabilities. My brother is on the autism spectrum, and so we're only 2 years apart. And being so close in age, growing up together, you are able to kind of compare and contrast your experiences as you're living through them. Um, he um, I it made more it as I look back on it as an adult, I realize what how important and impactful it was for him to be able to get interventions at an early age. It's helped him as an adult with uh, really just independence, um, developing skills that may have taken him longer to develop in a mainstream school without that level of support. And so um, after that, I got into technology, and I had no idea that accessibility was a thing within technology. And yet my first internship out of undergrad was an accessibility internship, and it was like lightning. It was just the perfect match, and I haven't looked back since. I don't see myself doing anything else.
That is amazing. So I know you mentioned that something that that was enlightening for you. So what was your first aha moment with accessibility?
Sure. The first aha moment that I had with accessibility was learning about and getting hands on with a screen reader, because up until that point I had interfaced with my technology, I would say, the way most of us might think we interface with technology, mouse and keyboard together, that kind of thing. And so it was something that I never really had to uh, consider in my personal lived experience up until then, up until I actually started to do the work and started to do the testing with assistive technology, to actually realize how different that experience is and how hampered that experience is, um, if things aren't designed accessibly, was something that was extremely eye-opening. And so that happened, the first few weeks in my accessibility career. And
Wow.
so that's the moment where I was like, okay, like I realized, wow, there's a ton of work that needs to be done here. Um, and it was sort of roll up your sleeves, get started, and get in and do the work.
Right, because it's only dependent on, if your website's not accessible, your screen reader is not going to do anything to help
Right.
you. So, yeah, that's for sure. And so, can you tell us about someone who you would say has had an influence on your accessibility professional career? What
Yeah.
lessons did that person teach you?
I have a couple. My very first supervisor, the first accessibility specialist that I worked under, his name was Scott Boren. He's over at Western Governors University, which is an online university. And what Scott did was, on day one, he had, up until I got there, along with another intern who came shortly after I did, he was doing that job all by himself for I don't even know how many years, maybe 2 years all alone. And so there was so much work that needed to be done, but he had taken the time to prepare almost like a boot camp worth of accessibility related material. Um,
Oh,
the WCAG guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for anybody watching who might not know what that is, these are sort of the globally recognized standards in terms of making web technologies work with to be accessible. Excuse me. And so all of that was new to me. And so he basically gave me a whole bunch of material, said, "Hey, get through this. These are some of the basics." And after that, here's this backlog of work. It was a different sort of learning platforms that we had to test for accessibility. He's like, "We have this backlog, just kind of dive in and start testing. These are the requirements, and
wow.
so you tell me if these look accessible to you." I was like, "Oh wow." And so to give me that sort of certainly at least part of it was the needs of the organization, right? There's just a lot of work to do, and I had to just get in there. We just needed, it was all hands on deck situation. But at the same time, there was a level of kind of trust in what I would be capable of doing, and so I think that trust was something that was very validating in the very early days. I mean, we're literally talking about weeks 1, 2, and 3 of my accessibility career, and for him to have put that faith in me that early was something that I think made a ton of difference. And I also have, I don't know if I could pick one, but where I am now, I have at Thomson Reuters, we have a team of many, I'll say many accessibility specialists, and they all have their own things that they're very good at. One, her name is Kim Dirks, and she's a specialist, but she's also an attorney, and so she is very well versed in accessibility law in a way that I just am not currently. And I think knowing the sort of the regulatory aspect of it, the social political aspect of accessibility is something that's extremely enlightening. Another man named Brooks Newton, who is nothing short of an accessibility encyclopedia. It's pretty amazing what this man knows.
Wow.
These are two other people who've had a very outsized influence on me at Thomson Reuters, along with Scott. So, yeah, there are many wonderful, teachers out there.
That's amazing. And what really keeps you inspired to continue in accessibility?
I think there's, well, just the fact that there's always more work to do. In a more personal sense, there's always something more to learn. There's, we obviously know about web accessibility. There's also mobile accessibility. Given that we interface with using our phones and other portable devices a lot more now, and so making sure that those experiences translate to that experience, that's something that is kind of a new front for me personally, as well as different developments in AR, XR, VR, what accessibility means in those spaces.
Wow.
Basically, wherever there's a bleeding edge in technology, accessibility is relevant. So just being passionate about technology in general helps keep that going, along with the personal aspect that never really changes.
It sounds really exciting. And I know you touched a little bit on your work, but can you tell us a little bit more about, what you do day to day? How have
Yeah,
you made an impact within digital accessibility in your role as an
sure.
accessibility specialist?
Yeah, so I could take you through a week or a period of 2 weeks. For those who are familiar with Agile, the product that I'm helping develop is Agile. We're developing using Agile, and so what that means is we basically design it in 2-week sprints. We call them sprints, and so every 2 weeks we kind of get together and say, okay, the user experience designers are going to work on these stories. Or stories, for the people who don't know, can be essentially, in a sense, requirements, something that this product needs to do.
Right.
Sometimes those requirements are very technical, very specific. Other times it's more like, the customer is going to want to be able to do this, that, or the other. And so the UX designers get to work figuring out what that would mean for us. So working with the UX designers, I circle back with them formally, I circle back with them at least once or twice a week. We go through some designs together, and I take a look at the wireframes. Wireframes being sort of the blueprints, the visual blueprints for what it's going to look like. And I basically go in and take a look at it from an accessibility lens, thinking through the interactions and say, you know what, maybe this this interaction doesn't make a lot of sense, or maybe we need an error message here, something goes wrong, or just ask them questions, right? I don't always have the answer, but I do have questions to say,
Right.
in the event of an error, what's going to happen? Is there going to be an error message? Are we going to close them out? What do we what are we thinking through everything in the experience, basically? So always with an accessibility lens. Sometimes I step a little bit outside of accessibility, just in terms of I value good user experience very much, and so I will step outside what is might be considered the accessibility to make sure that the design as a whole makes sense. Because I really do think that accessibility, thinking of accessibility as something to be put in a box or compartmentalized, it doesn't work. So I'm not very shy about stepping outside of what might be explicitly considered accessibility if I think
Right.
it improves the product as a whole. But yeah, so look at those. We do that formally with 1 or 2 stories, but we have a list of stories, and I take a look at every single one before it goes out to the developers to actually build out. So that's kind of what I do every couple of weeks.
That's
There are
interesting.
many
Yeah, it's
other
like
things I can
continuous
go into too.
cadence.
Yeah, lots of other activities going on too that I could get into, but I think in the interest of time, I'll probably stick with that one.
No, thank you for sharing. And what experiences have been the most beneficial to you as an accessibility specialist, as you've been, for gaining experience in accessibility?
Sure. I think the most valuable experiences have actually been the more difficult ones. The reality is, in accessibility is, to me, like 90% advocacy. The technical skills are something that can be relatively easily taught. Advocacy is not. I think it's more of a mindset. Because the reality is that we are still biased towards the non-disabled experience. And so what that means is that designs will be, people will come up with designs that have all sorts of assumptions based on what a person would be able to do, or the mode that they're going to interact with this thing. And so because of that, you have to challenge people on that very often. And that means going against pretty established design trends or practices, things that do not work for accessibility. And so depending on who you're working with, that can be a very difficult conversation to have. So I think the most valuable experiences have been the ones where I've had to have those difficult conversations or work with people who see accessibility as more of a roadblock than something that's going to. And so learning how to navigate that, I think, is one of the most valuable things that any accessibility specialist could have. More valuable than memorizing a list of requirements, a bit more valuable than learning about ARIA, which is a kind of its markup to that's kind of specific to assistive technologies. I won't get too technical here, but because the idea is that it's the non-technical stuff that can be the most important. So I think those difficult experiences have been the most valuable.
I really relate to the advocacy. So I loved how you brought that up, because I've sometimes found that it's easier for me to advocate for someone else than it is for me. And even like identifying as a person with a disability, sometimes it's harder for me to advocate for myself than if I was advocating for someone else. So that is so true. And during the course of your journey in tech, how have you requested support for your professional development in accessibility knowledge?
Well,
I know you mentioned jumped right in, and you've had to deal with different experiences.
yeah, this one, it's interesting because I can be to a fault. I can be kind of a lone wolf sometimes. I will try to find out information on my own before I bother somebody else, and that's just kind of a personal. It's a. I feel a little uncomfortable, kind of asking something of somebody else. It's difficult for me. I feel like I'm bothering them somehow, but if I do have to, it's usually, thankfully, it hasn't been too hard because the accessibility people that I've worked with have by and large been very willing to share their time and their knowledge. So in that sense, it's very easy for me to request support because by and large, I've usually always had it. It hasn't been the case everywhere I've been, but certainly right now, I think there's a supportive group that I work with right now, and
That's
so
awesome.
it's not too hard to reach out to somebody on. We're on Microsoft Teams, recording this on Microsoft Teams. I can pull up a chat and talk with somebody if I need to, really easily, and so that open communication makes all the difference.
Okay, that makes sense. And during your career within accessibility, what was something that you learned that surprised you?
Something that I learned that surprised me, or at the very least, it changed the way I looked at accessibility and disabilities, is the concept of a temporary disability. So take, for instance, a really common example would be a broken limb. You know, you break your arm or you break your leg, and for the time that you're healing and you're in a cast, you don't have full use of that. And so that is a temporary disability. But there is also instances like, and I would have to find an image with this, and you might have seen it. I'll share it. But a parent who's swaddling a child in one arm, that's a very situational thing, but it is a disability nonetheless while you're swaddling a child because you don't have use of that arm, and so just changing this idea of disability as something that is almost like a defining characteristic of somebody versus something that a person lives with for one reason or another and lives with it for various amounts of time. And it kind of opens up your mind to the idea that disability can and will affect all of us in one way or another at some point in our lives, whether we realize it
Right.
or and appreciate it or not. So that was something that I think was it really challenged the way that I thought up to that point.
Okay, interesting. And that made me think of my next question actually was, what's the difference between, for you, what's the difference between inclusive design and accessibility?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think inclusive design is really more of a mindset. This idea that you're going to do what you can to not just incorporate various ideas and perspectives, but incorporate people with various ideas and perspectives and experiences, include them in the design process. Right? So you're not just, inclusive design can't happen in a genuine way if the design process is not inclusive as well. And I think
Right.
accessibility is similar, but I think it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more in the execution or the kind of the output of that process. I think accessibility is kind of like, okay, in order to be accessible, we need to make sure, not that we need to do XYZ, we need to make sure that XYZ happens. I don't think accessibility is, there are instances where it is, but it's not always so prescriptive. And I think it lives a little bit more in my view, and it's a difficult question. It's difficult to separate the two. They do, intermingle quite a bit. But I do think inclusive design is the process by which we end up with accessible experiences. I think that's the best way I can answer that
You look
question.
at. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. And I know you've talked about your team, right? How you all work together. How do you build support for accessibility in your organization? How do you touched on advocacy, and I'd love to hear more about how do you advocate for accessibility on your team?
Introducing, kind of trying to make it come alive for people. An example that I gave, so this is when I was at Western Governors University. At the time, I think we had about 100,000 or so students enrolled at any one time, or some, I don't remember the exact figure, but I figured out the percentage of people in the United States. The data was a few years old, but nonetheless, estimates for how many people live with color blindness in the United States, okay, for example. And so I extrapolated that and I applied it to our student population. Granted, it was obviously going to be a very rough estimate, but the way I made it come alive in one of our kind of department-wide meetings was that potentially the number of students that we serve today who are colorblind would be about equal to the student population at Notre Dame University, the entire university.
Oh, wow.
And given that, that it really worked because it is a university and they're student focused, and we know what other schools are out there. We have a sense of these things. And so to imagine that in very real terms for this audience, to make it very real for them in that sense, it's something that they're like wow. And even when I figured it out, I was like, wow. So the way I build support for accessibility is doing things like that, finding ways to make it personal for people, because I think it is personal for everybody. They just don't realize it yet. They don't. As a society, we haven't placed enough of an emphasis on, just how much this really does affect and touch. It touches everybody's lives. So it's just making that effect very real and very tangible, very conscious for people is something that that's how I try to build support for accessibility.
Make it personal. I'm definitely going to quote you on that.
Feel free.
And in all the things we've talked about, I'd love to hear, for you, what's your proudest accomplishment in accessibility?
Oh, wow. Um,
I'm sure you've heard many.
yeah. And so this is something that actually came up extremely recently within the past couple of days. But the way that the way I just described my day to day or my week to week, where I'm an embedded accessibility specialist in this design process, that was very new at my workplace. I was the first one to be a part of a project that did it that way. And so as soon as I came in, I felt this kind of pressure to just to make sure that this was a success, because accessibility up to that point had kind of maybe lived at the end of the design process when it's too late to make a lot of changes and things like that.
Right.
And so to be embedded in the process from the very beginning, and proving that not only can work but is the most effective way to work is something that I'm extremely proud of, and I'm proud of the designers that I've gotten to work with, because they've taken accessibility very seriously the entire time that they've worked with me. So I think to this point, to sort of be what I hope, what I hope will end up being the standard bearers for this, so that other teams throughout our part of the organization will take a look at the way we do things and encourage them to do it our way, and include accessibility specialists, really embed them. I think that's something that I'm very proud that we've been able to do.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I hope they do. That sounds amazing. Um, in terms of, we've all had a set of challenges, right, within this field. What was the most frustrating thing you faced in your career within accessibility?
Yeah. I think and this is definitely not unique to accessibility, but ego can be a problem. I have had to navigate people who would say that they care about accessibility, would say that, Omar, you have, this kind of free reign to really kind of tell us what needs to be done. But to be told that, and then in practice have people go over the top of you, to have people, and essentially prove that they were just giving lip service to it, while also trying to, I don't know if they, I don't know, almost as if they've, people who feel threatened when somebody knows something that they don't, and try to kind of, you know what I mean? And I certainly, that is absolutely not something unique to accessibility. I know that, but nonetheless, it can be a problem within accessibility too. Dealing with people who absolutely have to be the smartest person in the room at all times. In other words, they don't care about solving the problem. They care more about being the person that solves the problem. And so that's a great way to kind of shut people down, encourage other people around them to get disengaged, and that's kind of a nightmare scenario, especially for accessibility, which, like I said earlier, is so dependent on the incorporation of a variety of perspectives and opinions. I think the most successful teams, most successful accessibility groups are the ones where open dialogue and even disagreement are accepted and encouraged. And it's a place where, you can feel safe to disagree and know it's not personal, that it's all in service of something, kind of bigger than ourselves, more important than any one of ourselves. So that's been the biggest challenge, dealing with workplace cultures that don't encourage that. Yeah.
How have you dealt with that? That sounds crazy.
Yeah. Honestly, you kind of bite your tongue sometimes, or you bite your bottom lip, and you realize that there are certain things that you won't be able to change about the culture around you. And so, my job is to sit down and do the best I can for the people that I know are counting on me to do this job well, and controlling what I can within that. It doesn't take away all the frustration, not by a long shot, but it does help say, you know what, all I can do is control what I can control.
Control what you can control, affect what you can affect. Yup. I feel that. And I know you mentioned that teams have different cultures, right? And so how is it different working, because it sounds like you're working for an actual dedicated accessibility team where you have other people who care about it equally as you do. How is it different about working for an accessibility team versus other teams where you've worked with, which may have not been focused?
I think it can affect things in ways that you might not expect. It is overall, I think it's a net positive to be within a larger accessibility team, precisely because of what I said about the diverse perspectives and opinions and things. When you're an accessibility specialist all by yourself, the only perspective, and then I guess this depends on how you approach it, but the only sort of like you are the ultimate source of accessibility knowledge, and so kind of by default it's going to be your own perspective, your own opinion, which it can help to have a singular voice, but you're also not getting the diverse set of opinions that you might need to do that better. That said, with a larger accessibility team, other people who are not accessibility specialists who are coming to us for opinions, there is also a chance that selective hearing can happen, kind of like I'm going to go to the accessibility specialist that I know is going to give me what I want to hear, or something like that, or is more likely to give me what I want to hear. Yes, that kind of thing. It happens. It doesn't happen terribly often, but it can happen. And so nothing is perfect. No situation is perfect. It's just something to watch out for, right? So, but nonetheless, I would still, I would prefer at least a good size accessibility team versus being one person or two people trying to do too much.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And working within this field, this was a question that I always like to ask people because it's something I'm curious about. How do you change people's hearts and minds about accessibility?
How do you change people's hearts and minds? Yeah. Going back to making it personal for them somehow. If you can, so I mean, something that can make a big difference is really having a live demonstration. Like, this is what it means to use an assistive technology. Like, especially with a product that they already know, rather than giving them a YouTube video about something random, to actually come in and have like a live demonstration, like say, like, look, this is what we're doing wrong. This is why, this is why this is kind of the impact that this has on this person who relies on this method to interact with our stuff, and they can't do it. So this is why it's important that we get this right, because people might not realize just how impactful it is. Like, basically, I think in a lot of people's minds, accessibility is kind of this abstract idea. Like, they have this abstract idea that, okay, like, yeah, a person with a disability needs to do, like, they know that the person with a disability is gonna interface with a mobile phone or a computer a little differently. They know that much, but it's kind of this abstract idea that they can't quite wrap their heads around until you really make sure that it's kind of like there's a real memory attached to it. There's something tangible for them to look to. It's like, okay, like, that's what that means then. Okay, this is why I have to do this right. So
make it more tangible, for sure.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
just get rid of that abstraction, that layer of abstraction a little bit.
So how can you make it more about people and less about standards and compliance?
Similar thing. It's easier for me because that's just kind of how I'm wired. I'm wired to think about the person first, which is why I like accessibility in the first place, because it's not, so, black and white, I guess. But in terms of making that, truthfully, there are people who you will be able to make it, alive for them, to make them care about it in that way. Truthfully, there are other people who are just a lot more metrics driven. They just are. That's their interest. That's, and realistically, there's only going to be you're only going to be able to. People are like kind of like rubber bands almost. Like, they're like, yeah, you can stretch them out for a little while, but there is a limit. And so some people just have a limit, and so it becomes a matter of appealing to them. Sometimes you will have to make it more metric based. It's one of the more uncomfortable parts for me personally, because I have such a hard, I guess, kind of a repulsion to that kind of thing. I don't like the idea of people being reduced to numbers and metrics, but it is a part of the job that you will have to do this once in a while. So just kind of finding the way. It's slightly less about making it more, human for them, and more about understanding what, just given the context, like, maybe, okay, I need buy-in from this person because this feature needs to be totally changed, something like that. Well, this person that I need to appeal to is more metrics based. And so, you know what, in order for me to do kind of the greater good, I'm going to have to appeal to them in the way they need to be appealed to. So kind of, influence this person in the way that they can be influenced. So it's kind of like tailoring the message and understanding that not everyone is going to just do it because it's the right thing to do. Not everyone's going to have that. That's just kind of unfortunately the reality. And so that's where it's our job to kind of take ownership of the end result that we want and making sure that that happens. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Appeal to them in the way that's going to make a difference. So yeah. So as I'm learning more and more about this field, you hear from different experts and people who work in the field, and I feel, to me, it's a little ambiguous, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what does an expert in accessibility mean to you?
I think an expert is someone who lives in some domain, whether that is technology or law or human rights, politics, what have you. Someone who has a skill set but keeps accessibility close to their heart and makes that the motivation for what they do, and shares that knowledge and shares the work that they do. I think that's what makes an accessibility expert. There has to be an application of whatever it is that you know to the world of accessibility, and a willingness to share that knowledge and because not everybody does. Some folks are more, and it doesn't. I guess it's not even a hard requirement. Like, you can be an accessibility expert without being like the super present kind of broadcasting everything kind of a person. I don't mean to make it sound like that. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have this knowledge and be willing to, at the very least, do something meaningful with it. And I think sharing is a big part of that. That's how you just kind of keep everybody aware, whether it's kind of a new pattern for doing something or other, technologically, right? Or if you're a lawyer and you're analyzing different cases and providing commentary on these current events that will have an impact on accessibility and what that means if a decision goes one way or the other. So those are the people that I look to as experts. I don't know if maybe I'm describing accessibility influencers more than experts.
I mean, an influencer could mean an expert to you. So.
Right, exactly. Like it maybe an influencer is a subset of an expert, right?
Okay.
But yeah, an accessibility expert, and someone who always improves, someone who's always improving, kind of pushing themselves a bit, advancing the accessibility space in some way. I think, you can't sit and be complacent and just be satisfied doing an accessibility job and collecting a paycheck. I think you have to really want to push, advance accessibility in some way as well.
That makes sense. And so for others, who are thinking about being involved, plunging into this world, what advice would you give to someone or people who are thinking about, getting involved in digital accessibility?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. What advice would you give to others who are thinking about getting involved in digital accessibility?
Don't be afraid of what you don't know. There will be many, many, many times that you don't know an answer immediately off the top of your head. People around you who are looking to you as an accessibility specialist of some kind, they're certainly going to want to know, hey, I'm a designer. We're trying to do this. We know we need to make it accessible. Tell us, what does that mean? What do we need to do? A lot of these things do take time to think through. And I think that taking the pressure off of yourself to deliver immediately, and instead focusing on delivering quality. I think giving yourself the room to do that is going to help you a lot. It's going to help take away some of this sort of imposter syndrome type stuff that we all feel. It doesn't matter who you are. Right. Everybody feels it in some way, shape, or form. And so giving yourself a little space to kind of say, you know what, like I don't know this off the top of my head. Give me a little bit, and I'll get back to you with something. And that gives you the space to not only go and do the job right, but it gives you the space to go and learn something and you know, put something new in your toolbox that you can reference more quickly for the next time.
Right.
Keep that humility, because there's going to be times where like things will not work out right every single time. That's just the reality. And especially if you're part of a bigger organization, you know, you're not going to win every single time either. Sometimes, you know, something's going to get pushed through that you really have no control over, because you don't have the power to really, you know, push a big red button and say, nope, we got to stop it. Like, you don't always have that power. You could say things really forcefully and say, like, you know, you make it really undeniable. Like, hey, if you're going to do that, understand that this is what the impact's going to be for people if you do that. But sometimes you have to understand that it's not going to be a win every single time, and you have to be okay with that, because you have to get up again. You know, it's not going to stop. Like, you have to tackle the next thing and try to get that one right. It's there's always going to be something to challenge you. And so the more comfortable you get with almost like, and it's almost, I'm pretty sure this applies elsewhere, you know, it's just bigger than this. Like, just be okay. Like, I don't want to necessarily say be okay with failure, more like don't let failure just stop you. Like, don't let failure halt you in your tracks, and don't let failure keep you from getting up again. Because it's you know, you roll on to the next thing, and you try to influence the best that you can and move on to, like, you know, it's all part of it. And I think especially as you're getting started, you're going to be in positions where you probably won't, you realistically, you probably won't be able to just tell somebody like, no, you can't do this right away. It's just part of it. You're still learning, for one. And plus the you know, the entry level or whatever position that you're entering into is, you know, there will be a level of influence associated with that. And so, you know, just learning how to, you know, don't get so frustrated that you just stop dead in your tracks, is all I can say.
I love that. I love that. And on the same thought, I'd like to leave people with, you know, the one thing. So, what is one thing you could tell someone in your role, like someone like an accessibility specialist, that they could go do today, right? You can go do today and you can achieve accessibility in the short term, you know, in their day to day work. For example, you know, it could be something as simple as, hey, remember to put all text on your social media, right? So, someone using a screen to navigate can do that. It could be something as simple as that. But what is that one thing that someone can go do today?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I guess this is this will skew a bit younger, but something that really easy that everybody can do that not everybody realizes is important. They're called camel case hashtags. So camel case hashtags, or camel case, is just making sure that the first letter is capitalized in every word. So what that does is it helps a screen reader, you know, because you know, it's just strings of text, right? It's basically a one-word string, a hashtag. And so by putting the capitals in there, a screen reader will actually be able to read out the hashtag properly, because it knows, like, oh, okay, this is a start of a word. This is a start of a word. This is a start of a word. And so as we write out our hashtags, you know, whatever, I'm awful thinking of hashtags, but you know, any multi-word hashtag, just capitalize the first letter, and it helps people with, you know, who with learning disabilities, you know, who would otherwise have to pay attention and make you know, really work to understand what the hashtag is.
Just makes it more
It helps
readable for everyone.
and it makes
Yeah.
such an easy thing to do. I don't know why we don't do it already, but there you go. So I think that's something that is very simple thing that everyone can keep in mind and do to make things a bit more accessible.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I know we went a little over time.